again, I see. Hungry for another story, I'll take it. As usual, I'm happy to oblige. Technology is fascinating, isn't it? Even more so the advancement of it. But that's not what the story is about. But it does include this little piece of technology. You see, what I have in my hand is an audio recording from a man named Jacob Delgadillo, a little piece of humanity trapped in a bastille of forgotten technology. I was actually about to listen to it myself, but you might get a kick out of this too. Come closer so you can hear better.
This is a little awkward for me. I'm not used to keeping an audio journal, but my therapist advised me to keep one. Actually, he advised me to keep a journal to write in, but I can hardly read my own handwriting, so audio journal it is. Okay, where do I begin? I moved here from Boston about a year or so before I got the job at the hospital, and was only a nurse intern the first time I met Dr. Craver. I'll use the term met loosely, as we didn't actually meet per se. Not formally anyway. On my first day, Priscilla, the head nurse, was walking me through the basic procedures as we walked through the hospital. As we approached the nurse station, I spotted a blonde-haired doctor walking down the hall, reading a chart on a clipboard with a surgical mask across her face. I glanced in her direction as she lifted her head. Her silver eyes met mine, and I instantly felt a chill run down my spine. The look she gave me was so cold and distant, like she was looking through me. When I say she had silver eyes, I don't mean they were a grayish hue of another eye color. I mean they were true silver, like dinner at a fine restaurant. I suppose they could have been colored contacts, but I wasn't thinking about that at the moment. My mind was preoccupied with trying to remember how to breathe. I don't think I'd ever had to breathe manually before. Without breaking her stride, her eyes drifted back to her chart as she passed by. I asked Priscilla who she was. She told me that was Dr. Sarah Craver, the head surgeon. Unprompted, she assured me that Dr. Craver was good at her job. At that point, I didn't know why the other nurses referred to her as Dr. Slaughter, but the look in her eyes told me that I didn't want to find out. And yet, the mystery surrounding the surgeon piqued my curiosity. That was last year, and I would occasionally catch glimpses of her as she passed in the halls. I took care never to look her in the eyes again. I learned my lesson from the first time. I never saw her without the mask, though. At first, I figured it may be because she was germophobic, but working in a hospital, it made both perfect sense and none at all. While the hospital is required by the state to be a highly sterile environment, the fact remains that a hospital is a petri dish of sick people. I asked the other surgeons what they knew about her. They turned pale and avoided answering, assuring me that she was good at her job. I never questioned whether or not she was good at her job. I just wanted to know why she wears the mask. Finally, I decided to ask Kevin, the scrub nurse. Kevin and I weren't exactly friendly, but we were on familiar terms, so I figured I could get some answers out of him. But when I approached him, I noticed he had a distant look in his eye, like he'd stared into the mouth of hell. When I asked him what happened, he started rambling about her being in his mind, and other things that didn't make any sense. He grabbed me by the scrubs and started shaking me, saying, "It's under the mask! It's under the mask!" Before he went catatonic and fell silent. He never said another word for the rest of his life, which admittedly wasn't that long. A month later, one of the residents were leaving work late one night, and Kevin was little more than a smear on the pavement in front of the hospital. Given the amount of carnage, it was speculated that he jumped off the top of the hospital to his death. It had apparently been a slow night, so there was no telling how long he was lying there before someone finally found him. His autopsy revealed he had copious amounts of oxycodone in his system, most likely to numb himself of the pain should he had failed his attempt. As sad as it is that he killed himself, I can't say that I didn't see it coming. I'm surprised that he was able to carry out his duties for as long as he did before then. Poor fool just went crazy. That reminds me, I need to call my sister back home and check up on her. She quit her job as a marine biologist a few months ago after she lost her mind. Something about a big black fish at the bottom of the ocean. I need to make sure she's taking care of herself. Anyway, the hospital put an ad on an employment website for a new scrub nurse, so I told Priscilla that I wanted to fill in until they found a replacement. I know I'm not a surgical nurse, but I've learned a lot in the past year working in the hospital, and I think I can take it. Besides, my curiosity about Dr. Craver is killing me. Percy tried to stop me, telling me that no one has worked in the surgical department with Dr. Craver and lasted more than a year, with one surgical intern being the exception. She worked under for 2.5 years, but quit her job to go into the police academy. I guess whatever messed up things the police officer sees on the streets can't hold a candle to what they see in the operating room. However, that didn't shake my curiosity, and I figured if the surgeon could do it for that long, so could I. I suppose Priscilla saw how determined I was, and shook her head as she informed me that I would have to talk to Dr. Craver myself. My stomach dropped when I realized she was right. If I wanted the position, I'd have to swallow my fear of the phlegmatic physician and speak to her. Of course it was a fear I knew I had to get over anyway, if I was going to be working with her. Well, here goes. If I'm going to hold a chance of getting any closer to get to know her better, this is my chance. Wish me luck. I had an interesting day today. Last week I spoke to Dr. Craver about the position for scrub nurse. Although I was apprehensive the whole walk over there, the surgical wing was just down the hall from the nurse's station, but it felt like I was walking for miles. My heart was pounding in my chest the whole time as I desperately thought about what I was going to say to her. In hindsight, I realized I should have deliberated what I was going to say before I made the journey down the hall, but I was worried if I thought about it too much I might chicken out of it and go to the nurse's station. Finally, there I was, standing at the door of Dr. Craver's office. Man, you hear a nickname enough times, you start to forget their real name. Anyway, I remember feeling the coldness of the doorknob under my fingers as I stood there frozen, second-guessing my decision. I shook off my fear and took a breath before turning the knob. I was never going to get any answers if I let my anxiety get the best of me. I walked in, but she wasn't at her desk. A wave of disappointment and relief washed over my body as I turned to leave, but when I turned around, there she was. She was standing right behind me, staring at me. I made the mistake of looking into her silver eyes again, and I lost my voice for a moment. Being that close to her for the first time, I noticed that the mask she wore was speckled with small brown spots, and I realized that there were spatters of dried blood. She raised her eyebrows at me and tapped her watch, indicating that she was busy. She looked a little annoyed by my presence, though I can't say I blame her. I'd be annoyed too if someone was standing in front of my office gawking at me. I shook off my shock and managed to stammer the nature of my visit. I told her that I knew I didn't have any training, but I was willing to learn, and I knew it would only be temporary anyway. She didn't say anything. She just stared at me. I lost my concept of time for a moment, and I had no idea how long she was standing there staring at me. I still don't, but I think I only ever saw her blink once. Finally, she pushed past me and started filling out some paperwork on her desk. At the moment, I guess that was her way of telling me that she was interested, so I left it at that. Anyway, I got to the nurse's station this morning and noticed that my name wasn't on the roster. I asked Priscilla what the deal was, and she said I was scheduled to train with Dr. Craver today, as a scrub nurse. To say I was surprised would be an understatement, but nonetheless I was floored. As I walked back to the surgical wing, I felt my stomach in my throat. I was terrified, but also excited. I conquered my fears and took the invitation, and it paid off, but it would have been nice for Dr. Craver to have said something, or given me some kind of signal that she was even the slightest bit impressed by my interest. I found in the prep room where she had all the tools laid out. She told me what each tool was, and what standard procedure was in the OR. She quizzed me on everything, and assured me that I'd never have to participate in any actual surgery. My job was to just make her job easier. I'm not sure how one's voice can simultaneously sound so commanding and so lilting, like a black tulip, yet she managed to accomplish both. However, it was strange. Her mask didn't move once when she spoke to me. When anyone else at the hospital spoke with the mask on, it moved a little with their mouth, but hers remained still as a rock. At the end of my shift, I walked back to the nurse's station to sign out, and the other nurses stared at me with a look of concern and disbelief. When I asked about it, they simply shook their heads and told me not to worry about it. I'm not worried about it at this point, but I'm starting to think that maybe I should be. I assisted in my first surgery today. It was a little bizarre. It started out pretty simple. I assisted in prepping Sarah and I laid out the tools that would be needed as she trained me to do. She made the initial cut and got to work. Let me tell you, Seeing the inside of the human body for the first time, well, let's just say it's not for the weak-stomached. However, I started to notice things. As I watched her cutting into the patient, the dullness left her eyes. They began to sparkle like pyrite. Her hand slipped a few times, which caused blood to splatter a little. She corrected the mistake and kept going, but she didn't acknowledge it at all. However, I did notice the way her eyes gleamed as the patient bled, and the squelching of the organs moving around in the patient's body seemed to carry her gently into euphoric bliss. She was enjoying herself, maybe a little too much. I think the look in her eyes while she was operating was far more terrifying than the previous look of vacancy. When the task was completed, she called for the sutures, where she took her sweet time with stitching, allowing the thread to slowly snake through the patient's skin as she pulled it through. After the other doctors carried the patient away to his room for recovery, I glanced over at her. Small droplets of blood were spattered everywhere. Her apron, her mask, even the tips of her blonde hair. She stood there for a long while, just staring at the bloody tools, with crimson liquid dripping from her gloves onto the floor. Seeing her standing there covered in blood with an eerily calm yet crazed look in her eyes, I understood how she got her nickname, and I silently wish I'd never known. The patient didn't complain of any pain when he woke up from the anesthetic, and follow-up scans showed that there were no problems, without even a single mention of the mistaken cuts she made in the operating room. She's obviously a good doctor, so I don't mind continuing to work under her, but given her state after the operation, I wonder how many of these mistakes were intentional. When she was out of earshot, one of the other surgeons took me aside and asked me how I knew which tools to give at what time. I didn't recognize that surgeon, so I guessed he was new. I was confused when he asked me this, and as I said, she told me which ones to hand her. His eyes got really wide, and he said that she hadn't spoken at all during the surgery. Not one single word. Must be his idea of some kind of a sick joke. I really should quit now. I know I should. I should tell her that I can't be a temporary scrub nurse anymore. But I can't. I have to get closer to her. Maybe I can find out why she's so blissful when she's cutting into a patient. I don't care how long it takes. I'm gonna find out. I can't take it anymore. I have to know. It's been 3 months and I'm no closer to finding out what makes her tick as to when I first met her. She's in my mind. I swear she's in my mind. Get out. Get out. It's her eyes. It has to be her eyes. No, not the eyes. Not the eyes. It's the mask. No one's touched Kevin's locker since he died. Did he die? Yeah, he died. He died. Sketches. I found sketches. She was covered in blood. Her mask was around her neck and I could see her face. Her face. Her mouth was stretched across her face like a Cheshire cat, but she had no lips. She was all teeth. So many sketches. She's in my mind. We have surgery today and I have to see if it's true. I'm gonna rip the mask off her face. I gotta do it. I have to see. Show me your Cheshire smile, devil woman. Show me.
Detective Bastian didn't need to hear the rest of the tape again to know that the last 4 minutes and 32 seconds of the tape was silence. It was as if poor Jacob Delgadillo had forgotten how to speak in the middle of his crazy ramblings. He guessed that Jacob had gone catatonic because there was no other sound after he stopped talking. No shuffling of papers, no squeak of a chair as it swiveled. Not even a throat clearing. Just the sound of shallow breathing. When the police were called to the hospital, they found Jacob wearing a mask attached to a tank of nitrous oxide. He was hanging by his neck in the prep room, with an overturned chair under him. It was apparent from the tapes they had found in his apartment that this Dr. Sarah Craver had something to do with this man's death, and that they may have been hasty in ruling his death a suicide. However, when they went looking for her, she was gone. Her name wasn't on the hospital roster or on the employee list, and she had disappeared from payroll. When he interrogated the hospital staff on her whereabouts, none of them had any idea. It was as if she'd just dropped off the face of the earth. That was all he needed. Sarah Craver was definitely a person of interest. Dennis Bastian sighed, reflecting on what a shame it was that Lizzie Potts disappeared shortly after Klein's release. If anyone would know the whereabouts of her former employer, it would have been her.
Bastian took a moment to reflect before opening the file of Klein's autopsy report. He hated Klein. He always did, though he never quite understood why. Maybe because of the fact that he handled bodies for a living creeped him out. Still, as much as he hated him, part of him was relieved that he wasn't Gemini. He's a good mortician, and it would have been a shame for someone as professional and dedicated as he was to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Bastian opened the autopsy report as he sipped his cold coffee. His eyes scanned the page lazily when he glanced at the picture of the cadaver. Then he paused for a moment when he noticed something about the victim's face. Bastian picked up the baggie again containing Jacob's personal effects and clutched his driver's license through the plastic. He looked at Jacob's picture on the card to see that his eyes were brown, and the section marked eye color confirmed as such. However, the picture of his cadaver showed Jacob to have eyes the color of fine silver.
Curiosity killed the cat. That's how the old saying goes. After hearing this tape, I can't help but agree. Unfortunately, due to the increased interest and advancement of technology, no amount of digital remastering of this will make the foolish many heed its warning. I hate the living, I swear. But perhaps it's affected you, and I suppose it's better than nothing. I guess the lesson here that Jacob Delgadillo can teach us is that some mysteries are best left unexplored.